Our guest on the program today is Samson Itodo, Executive Director of YIAGA Africa, a frontline advocate for electoral reforms and good governance in the country. Welcome to the program, sir.
Always a delight. Thanks.
Yes, the Anambra governorship election just ended. We already know the outcome, but in your own assessments, did this raise the bar in the conduct of elections in Nigeria in terms of credibility, fairness, and all other elements in measuring a good election?
I think if you do a comparison between the positives and the negatives from this and ask if we moved the bar, I would say it's a mixed bag. And quite frankly, there are fundamental challenges with the elections. First, when you run this assessment, you look at the context. What was the context for this election? The context that was fraught with apprehension and fear due to the insecurity, perpetrated by, secessionist groups like IPOB. We saw stay-at-home orders that were issued. We experienced assault and intimidation against INEC officials. And in the build-up to the elections, our position was for every voter who showed up on November 6th, they should be celebrated because they are defying all odds. And if they come out, then there is a huge moral burden on INEC and stakeholders to maintain the integrity quotient of that elections. And so if you look across, there were perennial challenges with election logistics. We don't seem to have gotten our hearts around it. And in this case, the Electoral Commission. Because our data at YIAGA Africa showed that at 7:30 a.m. on November 6th, only 17% of polling stations recorded early arrival. And once INEC officials don't arrive early, it would have impact on the commencement. And so you look across that by 2 hours from 8:30 when voting accreditation was meant to start, about 2 hours, that's about 10:30, only 55% of polling stations had opened. So you had close to half of the polling stations of the state recording late commencement. That is troubling, and that is a rollback and a recession on election logistics management. You look at the functionality of the smart card, of the BVAS. Yes, one takeaway from that, from Anambra elections, was that technology increases and enhances the integrity of a process. But that same tool can be used to undermine the elections and disenfranchise voters, because there were reported cases of where people showed up, and it happened in my presence, they couldn't cast their ballots because the BVAS machines malfunctioned. Our PVT data at YIAGA Africa showed that in 45% of polling stations, the BVAS machine malfunctioned. In 39% out of the 45%, they were fixed and voting proceeded. But in about 5% where they malfunctioned, they weren't fixed and they weren't replaced. And then in 3% of polling stations, the polling officials resorted to manual accreditation. Now, if people manually accredited in Anambra elections and they voted, it raises fundamental question. It doesn't matter whether the figure is statistically significant. What it says is that we still have gaps and vulnerabilities within the entire value chain of elections management that needs to be addressed. So these are critical issues, because when you extrapolate and you do this at a national scale, it bodes unwell for the entire integrity of the election.
You know, when the BVAS started developing problems during the election, one major thing we kept hearing was poor network access in most of those areas. And then a lot of people now are beginning to say that maybe some of the lawmakers or some of these legislators that earlier on kicked against electronic transmission of results and using technology also in the conduct of election have been vindicated, because their own argument is that the country is not yet ripe for that kind of technology. What would you say?
I don't think it's a vindication. What I know for sure is that for proponents of electoral technology like myself and YIAGA Africa, we note that these machines have vulnerabilities. There's no perfect technology in the world. We know that they have vulnerabilities. But when you weigh the cost benefit, because everything in this life has its advantages and disadvantages. Your phones, that's why sometimes you have to charge the battery of your phones. You know, so we note that there are gaps, but the question is, what are we doing as a country to limit, you know, those gaps from undermining the integrity of the process? And when there were challenges, did INEC respond by deploying technicians to fix it and ensure software updates were made? The answer is in the affirmative, because I just mentioned that in 39% of polling stations, you know, INEC deployed technicians to fix, you know, the software issues, and voting proceeded. So it's not a vindication. We note that. Of course, there are issues relating to digital security. That's why you've got mechanisms in place that addresses some of the vulnerabilities of these machines. But our principal position as an organization is this, that you cannot surrender your democracy to machines, because machines do have what? They have their shortcomings and their challenges. The best you can do is to ensure that you deploy electoral technology based on certain fundamental principles. The principles of efficiency, the principles of integrity, the principles of transparency. These principles are cardinal to deploying electoral technology. And the big question that INEC needs to respond to is the fact that in this entire regime of introducing new technologies, have we checked whether we comply with the test? And those tests around those principles that I spoke about. But we support the BVAS, fantastic, terrific technology that we all should support and embrace. However, INEC needs to ensure that those challenges are addressed. And if those challenges are not addressed, it simply means that there is an intention to undermine the process using technology.
Okay, Anambra State also is a unique state. If you look at the behavior of voters around in Anambra State, is peculiar because in most elections, they usually do not come out to the ballot to cast their vote. And this last election, governorship election, was peculiar because of the security situation and all of that. But you spoke earlier and you expressed concern about how the minority is determining or making decisions for the majority.
No, you see, to be honest, yes, Anambra is peculiar, but look through all the off-cycle elections. Let's start with the 2019 elections. What was the turnout for the presidential election? It was what? It was about 34%. What was the turnout for the governorship elections? It was somewhere around 32%. Now, that's general elections. If you look through the off-cycle elections, what has been turnout? We've not recorded anywhere. We've not recorded up to 40% turnout for all the elections. In fact, we're declining. In Lagos, during one of the by-elections, what was the turnout? About 3 or even 4 or 9%, right? Someone is in the House of Reps today in a constituency of over 1.5 million. They got to the House of Reps with how many votes? With just 14,000 votes. 14,000 votes, a seat in the Federal House of Reps. Go and check results from State House of Assemblies. People are winning elections with just 9,000 votes in a constituency where you have close to 1 million people. That is an anomaly. And the fact that our politicians don't see this as a threat to our democratic process, that makes them prioritize the common good, then we're not practicing what democracy is in the real sense. Because democracy is about majoritarian rule. But the minority will still have what? Will still have their say, no doubt. But when minority seems to be the majority, because the majority is unable to exercise their civic duty due to, one, the failure of the state to meet the needs of the citizens and the failure of the state to perform its own contract under the whole social contract relationship that we have with the state, or the fact that the institution and the persons who determine the final vote, it's not the voter, it's the judges. Because it's the court that determines the final vote in this climate. So why should people vote when they know that in actual fact, their vote is going to be upturned? Look at what happened in Bayelsa. The governor of Bayelsa wasn't the one who won the elections. YIAGA Africa's data clearly showed that. A different candidate actually won the election. But what happened? The court ruled, and then someone who does not enjoy popular support is ruling the state. It's the same thing that happened in Imo. Someone who came forth. How do you explain? Honestly, I don't know how to explain this to my kids when they probably grow up, that somehow someone who came forth in an election was made the governor in a state. How do you explain that? I think we tolerate a lot of, for lack of a better word, we tolerate the intolerable in this particular climb. And we're trying to normalize, what is unacceptable in saner climes. And it's just the political class that are beneficiaries of this. It's not the people, because the people are still, in abject poverty. There's insecurity. Talk about all the governance challenges. We have them here. So how did we end up here? Because we've not fixed our political system.
The Senate adopted the conference report of electoral reforms, and they also agreed that political parties should conduct direct mode of primaries. But we have seen statements from some political parties, even within the governing party, a lot of people are still against all of this. And then in your advocacy, it has always been about electoral reforms. We have seen INEC has made improvements over the years, but the problem now are political parties. How do we get them to begin to conform and also ensure that their own internal mechanism also contributes in strengthening democracy?
Your political parties are a mirror of a society. What you have is a society that has no respect and regard for the rule of law, no respect for values, no respect for principles. So the same individuals that we interact with on a daily basis, who show all forms of moral decadence, are the same people who have transported into politics. So do not expect anything different from our political parties. The only way that can change is the agency that citizens need to exercise, that we need to hold our political parties to higher standards. You cannot come and ask people to give you their votes. You take their votes, you get into office, and you do have no regard for the people who elected you into office. I think that's unacceptable. Our parties need to start with defining what is their political ideology and what's the philosophy that governs how they operate within the party, the kinds of offices that they contest for, and then how they aggregate the interest of citizens. Because what political parties do is interest aggregation. They aggregate social interest. And it's not aggregating interest of the elite. Because what you see within your political party system is just interest of the elite. It's not about the members. That's why delegates are bought. And so for those who are pushing for direct primaries, they're pushing for direct primaries simply because the candidate recruitment process in Nigeria is not only faulty, but it has been hijacked by a few people. So you can run elections for how many decades, but power still concentrates within a few. And the reason is these few have captured the candidate recruitment process within parties. So women, youth, persons with disability, leaders who have competence cannot emerge from those primaries. The issue around membership recruitment is critical. You can't say you're a political party if you don't have what? Members. How do we know if you have members? We need to check what? Your membership register. How do we check your membership register when even members of your parties cannot verify whether they are members of the parties? I tell you, if you go to the wards, right, where membership registration takes place, and see how compromised and how that particular ward registration is managed, you just know that we are not serious in this country. Because it's just one man who calls himself, or one, actually man, not woman, who calls himself a ward chairman, has his own notebook. He determines who gets on the register. And so you can't freely register. That's why when they want, part of their shenanigans is to make it difficult for people to register, especially when those people are political gladiators and want to register for those parties. So the membership recruitment process needs to be sanitized. Good a thing, you know, we're seeing the two major political parties speak about online registration. It's a progressive move. But the question is, what will be the quality of that entire process? What will be the transparency of the process? Some parties say they have 40 million members. Some say they have 50 or 30 million members. And I'd say that in one of the elections, I won't mention, where a particular party conducted primaries and said one of the candidates secured over 300,000 votes in the party primaries. When the elections came, the person didn't even secure up to 50,000.
And then you ask, where are those members?
And so you ask yourself, where are those members that you claim voted for you at the primary level? So these are issues, internal democracy within parties. They are issues that we need to deal with. Yes, the legislation, the electoral bill tries to enhance the development of political parties. But I say, if the actors remain, the game will not change.
Maybe INEC should get more involved in supervising political parties. INEC may not be doing that enough.
Who makes the law? And that's the irony of democracy. The people who are making these laws are the ones who are breaking them. The people who are making these laws are not making these laws with the prism and the lenses of the societal challenges that we grapple with. All they are interested in is whether this law will make them win elections in the next elections. This whole debate about direct and indirect primaries is just a tension. It's power tussle between legislators and the governors. It's not about the people. And that's the sad thing, that when you think that this debate is framed along the need to devolve power to the people and make party members, determine, who becomes their candidate, the debate is about, we want to take powers off the governors because the governors determine who gets what, when and how. And it's very sad. So it's not about public interest, it's about the preferences of our politicians. We makes a mockery of the entire concept of representative democracy, because I would think that as representatives of the people, it's about what the people want that you should advocate and should inform, political debates and public policy and legislations that our National Assembly makes.
One critical issue that is now a threat to democracy as it were now is vote buying. As INEC improves and makes it difficult to rig elections, politicians also get smarter, more clever, and a lot of them now, it's like votes are up for grabs and they come with money to polling units and people sell their votes, and it's now throws up a system where the man who has more money carries the day.
I love the fact that you said the man who has and not the woman who has, because the point is the men in the political system are the greatest problems that we have. And when you talk about electoral reform, that's why we need to insist that the National Assembly passes that legislation around creating additional seats for women. Look at what happened in Anambra. The video where women rejected attempts by polling agents to buy their votes. I think if there's one thing we should celebrate out of Anambra, is that these women have shown that regardless of the socioeconomic conditions that are poor, that are very, very bad, people can still stand up and push back on this weaponization of poverty that our politicians seem to have adopted as a mode of shaping electoral competition. And I think that it tells us a lesson. And I hope other people see that it is possible. Reject their money and vote for your conscience. Because the more you continue to sell your votes to this political class, the more you're not going to get good governance. Because they feel that they've bought their way into office, so you cannot ask them any accountability question. And what is life if you don't have the freedom and the courage and the confidence to actually ask someone whom you employ to do jobs for you within a particular time. You don't want to strip yourself of that responsibility and power. Our lawmakers, our politicians, and those in public office are our employees. We are the ones who pay them. So if you sell your votes, you won't have any rights, to speak and question them when they act in certain manner that is in contravention with the contract that they have with the people. So my sense is we can't legislate our way out of vote buying. It needs a new form of socialization. But so long as people remain poor, so long as we remain the poverty capital of the world, politicians will continue to weaponize it, especially unpopular politicians. And that's something we must ward against.
Yeah, another thing in the conduct of election is election security. All we hear most of the time is deployment. The Nigerian police is deploying 30,000 police officers to a particular state to secure the ballot and all of that. But when incidents of vote buying and some other form of malpractice take place, these security deployment or the security officers are not there to stop all of these things. And people just get away with it. There's hardly any deterrent. And even there have been also an advocacy for special courts to try election offenders and all of that. But it just seems we're not getting that right.
We cannot get, this right if you have a political class that wants to procure power at all cost. The biggest challenge before us is the fact that you have a political class that doesn't care how they secure power. All they want is they want to get power at all cost. And what makes it even worse is that when they secure this power at all cost, it's not for the good of the people. It's just to settle inter-elite wars. It's for primitive accumulation of wealth. It's not the interest of the people. Because if it were, we might be having a different conversation. Because the security agencies are compromised by who? It's the politicians. If our politicians play the game by the rules, they will leave the Inspector General of Police, they will leave the commissioners and DPOs to perform their job. But they won't, because they feel the only way to secure power is you must rig. And there's this whole aphorism everywhere. People say every politician rigs. Now show me one politician that doesn't rig. It's just he who rigs better than the other that wins. But that's sad. We cannot accept that. It cannot be the standard. It can't be the standard. So we have to push against it, that it is possible. And that's how you sanitize this entire process. So security agencies need to perform their role. Their loyalty shouldn't be to individuals. It should be what? To the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. It should be to the people of Nigeria. So when you see security agencies on election day stay aloof and just watch, they are product of society. They know that there's poverty in the land. Because for some people who sell their votes, to be honest, it's poverty. But it's not just, it's also poverty of conscience, it's poverty of values, and not just stomach infrastructure. And that's what needs fixing. That the trust quotient and the trust within the Nigerian context is broken so bad that people, even when things are going right, they don't believe that things are going right. Because it's broken. And don't blame the people. Blame the political class. Because they are the ones who have brought us where we are. So for security agencies, uphold the Constitution, right? They are security men and women who are very transparent. But even if you are a police officer, you see someone buying votes and you arrest the person and you put the person in detention. And then before detention, from the point of arrest to the police station, and you get a call from your superior and say, please release that person. What's the motivation? There's no incentive. So tell me who has been prosecuted. How many people have been prosecuted for vote buying? It was in this country in 2019 election. Let's even go back to 2015. All the people that were arrested, what happened to them? In this same country, a chairman of INEC made a public statement that indicted someone in 2015 who was in possession of PVCs, who committed an electoral offense in this country. Was the person not appointed a minister? So come on, give me a break. This political class are the greatest threat to our democracy. They are the ones who instrumentalize and compromise our security agencies and compromise INEC. And if they stay aloof and let these institutions do their work, you will see tremendous progress. That's what happened in Anambra. That's what happened in subsequent elections. In the build-up to the Anambra elections, there was this hoopla about federal might. Where did federal might actually come from? It just came from the fact that when the person who sits in Aso Rock and his party is interested in a state or subnational election, they deploy the institution of the state to do what? To undermine the process. That's where federal might came from. But what we saw in Anambra is it's not federal might, it's the Nigerian might that the security agencies in majority of the places that we observe were non-partisan and professional. Apart from the issues, pockets of issues like the one in Orumba, not where the returning officer had alleged that the police officer compromised, as well as the EO. But I'll say substantially, the security agencies, performed creditably well. So we need to give it to them. Again, before the election, we were all preparing for war. Sure. Everyone thought that, oh no, you needed to hear how my parents and friends and family. I'm sure even you who was around,
sure.
Everyone was calling.
Yeah.
Everyone was scared. But the moment you get into Anambra, the whole place was peaceful. And the election was peaceful. And in all honesty, apart from the pockets of violence that we saw, that election was largely peaceful. And so what was responsible for it? Sometimes, as Nigerians, we should give ourselves credit for the effort that we make to fix the anomaly in our society. The voter education, the fact that media amplified this issue, the peace accord, the assurances from security agencies, the entreaties by elders, in the Southeast, the rhetoric, everyone was interested about Anambra, even our international organizations. So when you get this outcome, what it tells you is that advocacy helps and it works, that dialogue can lead to better outcomes. So let's celebrate how Anambra went, and everyone who participated in this, that it shows that the little contributions that we all make is yielding results. Yes,
and we hope subsequent elections will be an improvement of what was experienced in Anambra. Thank you very much for your time on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Samson Itodo, Executive Director, YIAGA Africa. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.